All right. What's going on, everybody? This is not going to be super long. It's going to be sort of what I've done in the past, where it's sort of like a reaction video that doesn't last too long, maybe 20 minutes probably. But I was sent this video because I actually found out that Tucker Carlson is apparently crying about the new 2020 census that came out. And he even brings on his this Mexican pick me called Pedro Gonzalez to basically, be the guy who's going to be brown and self hating and agree with this racist clown. But furthermore, I want to sort of highlight how I'm noticing this new thing that the Republican Party, that the alt right, that these Wignats, because this is all a thing. This is a system in which they all operate together. You can watch, for example, if you go and look at like the most popular Wignat podcast, which is TRS Radio, right? What's the most popular show on there? Well, it's Strike and Mike. And what do they talk about on Strike and Mike? They literally respond to Tucker Carlson 24/7. In fact, these delusional Wignats have actually been convinced that they have a direct line to Tucker Carlson and that they're influencing him. Now, I want to say this, though. I do agree that there are probably communications between these more, I guess, famous Wignat grifters and the Republican Party and Conservative Inc. But at the same time, it's important to understand the nature of this relationship. The Conservative Inc. People here, and you guys have to. I'm feeling really under the weather today, so please try to ignore all the sniffling that I'm doing. But basically, the situation here is that these people, the Wignats, they are ultimately, how do I put this, like the bitch in the relationship here. They don't have any leverage on the Conservative Inc. They are constantly being led around by Conservative Inc., and it's why, for example, every time there's an election, all of the Wignats and the alt-right gravitate towards, voting Republican. You remember the Roy Moore election in Alabama where they said they had to vote Republican or everything was going to go downhill. Midterms, you got to vote Republican. All of this, because this is a system. This is what they do. They channel the energy of racist white working class people into just more mainstream liberal politics. Well, yeah, without further ado, let's play this Tucker Carlson clip here so we can kind of get an idea of where these people are heading and why.
It seems like just the other day that America's self-described moral leaders were denouncing us for pointing out the obvious. Democrats are intentionally accelerating demographic change in this country for political advantage.
All right, so just right off the bat here, it's like Democrats. Like, no. It's not a Democrat or a Republican thing. Mass immigration has always been what has kept America economically, I guess, relevant on the world stage. Because if you throw millions of bodies every year into a new land, you're going to be able to get the sort of, like, this is the way this current neoliberal economic system is set up in America, and that, like, you have to throw more bodies here. You have to have more people. Obviously, it's not going to be great for the native population, but it's like, this isn't something that just the Democrats do. And when Trump was in office, despite the fact that he ran it on an anti-immigration platform, he still opened the doors for, Hispanic migrants from Mexico and Central America, and for tons of Asian workers as well to work white-collar jobs and to replace middle-class people as well. And this is all by design. Tucker Carlson is lying to you and takes you for a moron when he tries to blame this on the Democrats.
So rather than convince people to vote for them, that's called democracy, they're counting on brand new voters. That's what we said on the show. Immediately after we said that, they became completely hysterical. They tried to pull us off the air. They said we were espousing something called the Great Replacement Theory, a well-known racist fantasy.
No, you are. It's just you're playing this game where you try to pretend that's not what you're doing, but it's wink, wink, nod, nod, and you know how this game works. You play this game where you flirt with the alt-right, you milk them for all their votes and their support, and then, you leave them dry and hanging, and you don't call them back, the morning after the election because They're hoes. That's what these Wignets are. They're hoes for the Republican Party. And they're not very intelligent hoes, I should add.
Right. In other words, shut up. And then this week, the new census numbers came out. Here's what those numbers show. The number, not the proportion, but the absolute number of Americans who describe themselves as white has dropped for the first time in our history since the census began back in 1890. The total decline is around 5 million people. Now, that is huge. Experts who study demographics for a living were shocked by it. They'd never seen anything like this. Why did this happen? Where did all these people go and why? They're Americans, remember. Well, as leading Democrats put it again and again, who cares? Fewer white people in America is a great thing, and we should celebrate.
Right now, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are at Mar-a-Lago, and they're throwing up because this is not the America they want to see.
I was at the White House the other day, and guess who's got Stephen Miller's old office? Her name is Susan Rice, and she's one of us. And guess who is in Ivanka Trump's old office? Julie Rodriguez.
Who?
She is Cesar Chavez's
I love Julie.
Granddaughter.
Did you hear that? Her name is Susan Rice. She's one of us. Meaning she's a Democrat? No. It means she's not white. Us is the non-white people cheering the extinction of white people. That was on television. Think about that for a minute. It's hard to think about it, actually, because it's that evil. And if you wanted to encourage permanent racial division, maybe even violence in America, that is exactly how you would talk on television. These people are completely out of control. They are dangerous. And it's not just CNN analysts who are talking this way. By the way, once again, there is no more divisive thing that you could say on television. There's no way you could more quickly and more permanently wreck the country than to encourage people to gloat over the decline of a race. Seriously? Imagine any other race. People talking like that. It's nuts, actually. But again, members of Congress are talking that way, or even...
Now, what Tucker's omitting to you is the fact that this is actually the way America has operated for most of its history. What do I mean by that? So if you look at demographic changes in specific states, we can use southern states as an example here. So if you look at the Carolinas during the colonial times, and even during their actual days prior and during the Civil War, in a lot of these southern states, Black Americans, despite being slaves, actually outnumbered the white population in a lot of these states. And a lot of laws were passed immigration-wise and eugenically to essentially curb this throughout, a very long period of time. And now we're in a situation where whites do outnumber blacks in most of these southern states. That didn't just happen by mistake. That was entirely by design. Playing these demographic games and trying to do this sort of stuff to other races is not something that literally just started this second here. This is something that has been going on forever, and it's important as well to emphasize the fact that the definition of white has constantly been changing under law in the United States as well. We've had several Supreme Court cases, and this has actually been a way in which the Anglo elites have tried to pacify the proles that get worried about demographic changes, which they usually start naming new groups as white. So you had like a Supreme Court case in 1915, for example, that listed Syrians as white, and they weren't considered white prior to that. And it was actually, and we've had this general trend that was really accelerated during the 1900s. It accelerated to such a degree, actually, that even the original Anglo stock was getting so mad, even though most of the immigrants were from Europe, but it was from places like Slavic countries and Italy, that they passed the Immigration Act of 1925, which curtailed places, like immigration from those places and sought out places from, Northwestern Europe instead. Which is really funny now because you have a ton of Wignets who are of Italian ancestry, often Sicilian, and they talk about how welcomed their ancestors were as white brothers, even though they were considered such a menace to American society that they literally had the law changed just for them. So it's funny, but I mean, Tucker Carlson is omitting a lot of relevant facts to you because, again, he considers the average watcher of his to be a moron, and he's not wrong.
Fake ones. Here's Eleanor Holmes Norton, who pretends to serve in Congress.
Look at where the population is, and that's how we win or have to try to win in the census numbers. Because the population growth has been in the cities and in the suburbs, among minorities, and that's what gives us some leverage.
Got that? Democrats win when we have fewer white people in the country, and that's why they're celebrating the new census numbers. She just said that out loud. You should never say anything like that out loud, but they are. At the Washington Post, columnist Jennifer Rubin joined the cheering. Fewer white people, she wrote, you can look it up, is, quote, fabulous news. Now we need to prevent minority white rule. Minority white rule? Do you recognize that phrase? Oh, South Africa. That's what she wants.
Now he's bringing up South Africa. See, he knows exactly what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing. He knows that these are major things that these Wignats obsess about. This is not, like, Tucker did not accidentally stumble into that. This was intentional. And yeah, this is exactly what I'm telling you. And wait for Pedro Gonzalez to come on here and to be his little pet pick-me. This is the most ridiculous part of the whole thing.
South Africa. She said it. We didn't. We would never say something like that. But wait a second, you ask. What about the numbers? What happened to all those white people who are now missing from the census? Well, it turns out.
Well, actually, this is important to mention as well. So I was looking at a lot of the demographic data, and this was actually something I predicted was going to happen. But actually, the number of Hispanic people of Hispanic origin who identified as white alone fell by 52.9%. So this went from 26.7 million to 12.6 million as of the 2020 census. And the number of Hispanics reporting more than one race increased from 3 million from the 2010 census to 20.3 million, which is a 560% change, which actually affirms what I believed, but I couldn't definitively prove, was that America's had virtually like a country that was half white, half non-white for a long time, even by around 2010. It's just that so many Hispanics were being counted as white, especially in the Southwest, that they just had no idea. And I think this was done intentionally to inflate the numbers to relieve anxiety for white people. But yeah, less and less Hispanics are identifying as white, especially now that options that are more mestizo friendly have been included in the 2020 census. And this is only going to increase. And I'm going to predict now that in the later censuses, we're going to see a lot of Americans who are Asian, who are white, who are black, that live in predominantly Hispanic areas that are just going to identify as Hispanic too on top of that, which is something that you may think I'm crazy, but I think it is going to happen. A lot of these people are going to be culturally absorbed as Hispanic in the Southwest, even if they're American right now. But let's continue.
Many of them perished in the opioid epidemic. Hundreds of thousands of young Americans, mostly from rural communities, dead from drug overdoses. A columnist from the Washington Post is cheering that. Their deaths are fabulous, she says. It's hard even to know how to respond to that. So we're going to pull back and let Pedro Gonzalez assess it. He's the associate editor at Chronicles Magazine, and we're happy to have him join us now. Pedro, thanks so much for coming on. Boy, if you wanted to wreck the United States and cause actual conflict, you would talk like Jen Rubin. Why are they talking this way?
Because this is about power and control. And the funny thing about the Rubin narrative is basically white people are being marginalized, but you're not allowed to notice.
We got the fucking mestizo on to fucking be the advocate for white people. I can't. You know, this is exactly where the country's going. Like, you got got the Anglo and his Mexican little pet right here. This is so sad. This is insanely sad.
You're not even allowed to talk about it. And if you disagree with them being marginalized, you're racist. It's racist, of course, because supposedly white people are the villains of human history. That is an absurd calumny. The truth is that the specter of white supremacy is used to fuel the growth of a corrupt political order, and whites are in fact the victims in this system. If you look at things like...
This is the average person online, like how he looks when he calls himself Castizo, by the way. Like, I am not joking. There are probably a ton of people that look very similar to Pedro Gonzalez right there. And they're like, I'm Castizo, bro. I'm white, bro. I'm mostly Spanish, bro. And then Tucker's like, oh, of course you are. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson attacks Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post, but he's going to dinner parties with her. Dinner parties that this mestizo boy, Pedro Gonzalez, is never going to get invited to. Sorry, Pedro, you're never going to go to their little parties. You're never going to get invited, even if your great grandpa was from Galicia, bro.
Wages and life expectancy, those have fallen for the white working class while they've risen for all other groups. If you look at our culture of affirmative action, we disadvantage white people in this country in jobs and schooling, and we do it by lowering expectations and standards for everyone else. Deaths related to suicide, and as you noted, drug overdoses and alcohol-related illnesses, these things have soared for middle-aged white men and women in the last 20 years. And people like Jennifer Rubin can do little than say, you deserve it, I'm going to spit on your grave, and you're not allowed to notice or do anything about it. All of this is the result of deliberate policy choices, not from the Democratic Party. It's also a Republican Party problem. The uniparty is a real thing. The ruling class in this country has deconstructed the nation it was entrusted to govern. It invited millions of people into this country and told them that any disparity in outcome, you just point to a white person and say, it's your fault. It's psychotic, but historically, this is what imperial and colonial governments do. They encourage...
Wait, what? This is something intrinsic to empire and colonialism now? Like, what are you even doing?
Division between groups. In other words, making people hate each other is the point. The neoliberal politics of racial grievances, of demographic deconstruction, are about poisoning the moral character of Americans and making them so hateful toward each other that they don't notice people like Rubin and they don't notice people like the Uniparty are actively trying to destroy their lives.
I think we need to stop talking about race entirely in this country and just talk about Americans. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Americans, leaving aside their color, have died of opioid ODs, and the only one anyone in Washington notices is George Floyd. So how do you think Americans feel about that? If your nephew or your son just died at 22 of an opioid OD and Jennifer Rubin says that's great news, like, you're going to get something horrible if you keep acting that way, aren't you?
Right. Yeah. No, it's fundamentally dehumanizing. You're completely stripping people of the thing that makes them human and basically just reducing them to points on a board. Fewer white people in this country, like you said, is a good thing. And again, if you're a white person and you hear this, what is your reaction going to be? And you're basically stoking, I mean, there's no way to put this nicely, right? You're ginning up racial hatred between different groups in this country that might otherwise get along, and you're doing it for either cynical or ideological reasons.
I mean, yeah, I hate to break this to you, Pedro, but this is a part of the whole package that comes with liberalism. This is what you get. You get race science. You get one drop rule. You get all of these things that have resulted in the political conclusion that we finally reached to. And this is the logical, inevitable conclusion of founding a country on Freemasonic values that heavily incorporated everything that comes from the Protestant Reformation and from Anglo-Saxon society at this point. So, I mean, like, you want me to feel bad, and it's like, no, this is the logical conclusion, and now you guys have to live with this mess. And I don't want a situation where people like Pedro Gonzalez are just going to be considered white Americans in 10 years. This doesn't help anybody. But let's see what else these people have to say before we finish this.
I'm not sure which is worse, whether you really believe in this stuff or it's just a means to an end. In either case, it is anti-civilizational. If you want to destroy a society, this is how you do it.
Exactly. And they're going to make people super radical, and it's going to be Jen Rubin's fault. There's no doubt about that. Pedro Gonzalez, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey.
Dear Lord. All right, yeah, I don't really have much more to add to this other than the writing's obviously on the wall. You know, they're doing just straight up pandering to not only white people, but they're bringing on their pet beans at this point to basically kind of convince them that they're white-ish. And this is kind of where we're heading to. And you can call me a crazy conspiracy theorist for implying that Hispanics are going to try to be memed into the next white Americans. I don't think it's going to be successful, but they're going to try. You can call me dumb, but it's like, this is what I see. And I've been watching all of this stuff for many years now. And yeah, I'm going to read these comments by OG the Rancho before I end the stream. It says, if you want to destroy a society, replace the sacred center point with Mammon and Moloch, which is true. Western society, as he says, is the cult of Mammon and Moloch. So, yeah, I don't think there's a better way to end the stream than that. You founded your society on a poisonous liberal ideology, and now you're reaping all of the benefits and more that come from it. So, yeah, death to America, and yeah, fuck Tucker Carlson, fuck these wignats that are trying to recruit Hispanic people, because I see what they're doing, and I don't appreciate it. Actually, we have one more comment here that I want to read. It says, Hispanics will become the next white. The Pochos have nothing in common with real Latin America. Well, this is why, even if we assume that is going to happen, which I don't think is a smart assumption, but let's say 100% for the sake of the argument that's true. Okay. And they'll have the exact same birth rates as the white Americans that are in decline. And the new Hispanic immigrants are going to replace them and have way more children. So even if this is going to be your cope, have fun. The Pochos are going to get replaced too by people that are genuinely better. And I include myself in this.